Hello, everyone, and welcome to human transformation, a topic that I spend the majority of my life thinking about. And I am honored and blessed today to have an amazing human here for us to learn from. Her name is AmyK. She's an international award-winning master speaker, author, business strategist, and a former senior executive. But she's also the leading expert on business and life at the intersection of leadership, critical thinking, and communication, something that I find is really, really important for those of you in leadership positions. So Amy, welcome, an honor to have you on.
Oh, it's actually an honor for me to be here. So thank you. A true privilege.
Yeah, Amy, those of people that know me always hear me say, tell me your story. And I think from doing some homework and background on you, I love your backstory. And I think it's really, really important for people to hear it. So it brings context to the conversation we're about to have.
Well, when I was 2 days old, Mike. No, so we won't go back that far.
No, sort of as I call it, the headline, not the history lesson, as they say.
Exactly.
Right?
So the headline news is I'm a teacher. And that has been the thread through my whole life. So if we go back, right. I was an elementary school teacher. I was a teacher trainer in our international school system. Then I was a corporate sales trainer. Then I started my own training company. Now I'm a keynote speaker, trainer, coach. But everything I do has this beautiful thread of teaching. And then I like to do that little jujitsu flip at the end. And it's probably because I'm a lifelong student. And I love it. I just love the whole intellectual discourse. And I come from an intellectually curious family. So it's in my DNA.
Yeah. No, I've said to people for years that intellectual curiosity is one of the gifts that makes a great leader, and not enough people have it. I think it's really, really important. But aren't you also a cognitive scientist? You didn't mention that, but I think that's an interesting, right? Because that's sort of
yes. I could talk about the brain. I'm a total geek. I could talk about the brain forever. So yeah, so my grad work is in cognitive science, metacognition, how we learn, and so pedagogy. The idea of how is the brain constructed in such a way that we process information, retain that information, and then have it influence our behaviors. So I've been a nerd my entire life.
Yeah, I think it's cool. That's why I love having a chance to spend time, because I'm on this mission to restore human dignity, unleash greatness in people. And I believe all people, leaders especially, have something that holds them back. And I think what I want to dive in a little bit is I love your quote around, because the life you desire is on the other side of a tough conversation. But as you know, a lot of people in leadership positions, we all know we got to have that tough conversation with one of our key leaders or our kids or our spouses or whatever, but we don't always really understand the impact by not having it. So I'd love to have you use that cognitive science teacher background to give us and the audience we have a little perspective on why it's so important. Like, Jesus, I mean, how much does it actually cost us by not having? And I mean, whether it's just financial cost or just, relationship cost. Love to hear your perspective.
You just nailed both. So it's we all know that tough conversations are avoided every day, right? Yeah. We're either afraid to start them. We're afraid of what the unintended consequences might be. We were certainly not trained to have them. I mean, how nice would it have been to have gone to a class in university or grad school that was like, hey, how to talk to a non-performer and actually get them to that doesn't exist, and it should. And so the cost financially, statistically, is anywhere between $7,000, $10,500 per conversation. And that's just on average.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. What? Say that again slow. That's I don't think a leader who listens would believe that. You're saying just do that again. That's
okay. So you mentioned it earlier. There's a financial cost, very specific statistically. There's the emotional stress, the emotional energy drain on you, the anxiety that you have, because we all know, I think we can all relate, that conversation that you're avoiding, it takes up headspace, which causes you stress, which then, now this is the brain geek in me, causes you to release more cortisol, which then affects your health. So there's all kinds of consequences to your emotional state, your physical state. And then if you want to get into hard dollar costs, they've proven that, and this is again on average, so there's going to be conversations that have less of a financial impact and conversations that have way more. But the average is somewhere between $7,000 and about $10,500. So I'm just going to hold that for a second. So you think about every conversation that you're not having about performance, culture fit, team dynamics. You might be a great rock star on the sales team, but you could be a C- team player. Like all these things contribute to whether your company is moving forward and whether it's actually going to be profitable, sustainable, keep people employed, retain and attract great talent. It all has a financial impact when you avoid the tough conversation that you know you need to have.
Yeah. Now, it's amazing how many people that I've worked with over the years, or that I work now with the Vistage folks, that just are so afraid to have these conversations and they don't understand the implications. So is there any way to say, well, that's the cost of it? Is there any way to sort of go the other way and say, if you do have them, is there relief? Is there any science behind the power of actually having the conversation?
Yes. So the flip side is you immediately get reduced anxiety and stress, in fact, relief. And so what happens is you change your entire chemical state. So already your body, and I don't want to get too woo-woo with everybody, but your body actually does start to heal. The mind-body connection that we talked about in the 1950s, where everybody's like, oh, mind-body, it's now so scientifically proven. And the most sort of prosaic example that I can give is when you're nervous, you feel butterflies in your stomach or your palms sweat. Like we know that the emotional state, your mindset, has an impact on your physical well-being. And so the moment that you have that tough conversation, usually your shoulders physically drop, you breathe that sigh of relief, and then you say, okay, well, now I'm getting one step closer to the life that I want. And so what I say is that this is a skill. And it's a skill you can get really good at. And the sooner that you can have a conversation, now I'm a hardliner on this. So with all of my coaching clients, Mike, I'm like, you have 48 to 72 hours to start this series of conversations. It doesn't have to be a one and done conversation, but you have 48 to 72 hours to start this conversation and get resolution so that you can get to either the relationship dynamic or the result that you actually want.
All right, so I'm listening to this and I'm going, wow, this is great. It makes a lot of sense, but Jesus, I really don't want to have these conversations.
Yes.
I don't even know how to begin. I've had them before. They don't turn out the way you describe them. I don't want to lose all this money. God help me. What do I got to do? Tell me how this would work. And then what I'd like to do after that is get into some specific examples, because I do find in these conversations, if we can give them something they can relate to, they can start to take action. But I'd love to have you sort of, if you don't mind, just sort of walk through how this might take place, some of the processes you use, and then we'll get some specific examples. Does that work?
Yeah, no, it's perfect. So let's just start with the fundamentals and then we'll go into specifics because I think it'll resonate more.
Yep.
So fundamentally, this is any leader, personal, professional, even with yourself, sitting down and saying, what's the tough conversation that I need to have? And what's my intention in this conversation? So you're not looking at, what do you need 6 months down the road? It's hey, what do I need to have happen in this very specific conversation? And then go Socratic. Create an agenda of questions, get your talking points, know what your keen messaging is, your critical points are, and then always close with action. And that can be action for you and me together. It could be an offer, a request, but you've got to get the behaviors changed. So it's not like, oh, that was really good. Glad we had that conversation. Thanks for your time. And one of the things that I think is most important for leaders is to say, okay, if I'm not sure how to start that conversation, be vulnerable about it. So I might come to you and I might say, hey, Mike, I've been avoiding this conversation because I'm not even really sure how to start it. This is a really tough conversation and it's really important. It matters to our culture. It matters to the client. It matters to your success here. It matters to your leadership role. But notice what I've done is I've layered in a skosh of vulnerability and then the importance of having it. And then I'm going to put it in the form of a question with this magical phrase. I'm the queen of magical phrases. I love them, mainly because I wished I'd had them. I learned the hard way. And so I love to share them to say, now ask a how might we? So notice this layer. I come in and I say, hey, Mike, we got to have a tough but really important conversation. I've been avoiding it because I wasn't really sure how to start it, but it matters so much that I'm here to really say, how can we ask and answer this question? How might we make you a more successful integrated team player? How might we turn this client around? How might we grow our sales by 12%? Whatever it is, you're going to phrase it as a how might we question. Then you'll have some of your key talking points, some of your critical messaging. Then you're going to make sure that you leave with action, you get their buy-in and their engagement.
You find when you do it that way, it's more one of the things that's tough with these conversations is a lot of leaders always try to find things that someone else told them was going on or about this person or the situation, versus this sounds like you're really having a very intimate one-to-one conversation. We're trying to help that person. So it feels like it's more, I'm here to help versus critiquing. Is that, am I hearing you right in that?
You heard it beautifully. And I think that's because, one, most of us go in and we've been taught to make it a power play.
Yeah.
Versus a connection. And this is where I play very differently. And this is, you'll either agree with me or you won't. It's very definitive. I believe that even when you are frustrated, even when you are disappointed, even if you're a little angry, you have to go in seeking to connect with somebody. Find that humanity, because otherwise they're going to double down in their defensiveness. They're not going to hear anything that you have to say, and they're less likely to change their behavior. If I can connect with you first, make you feel seen, heard, and understood. Now notice, this conversation is already not about me. There's things I want from you, behavioral change, but until Mike feels seen, heard, and understood, Mike ain't changing his behavior. He's going to double down with blame, excuses, not his fault. Why are you treating me like this? And so you have to start with connection if you want to get anything good out of it.
Yeah, I love that. It's so helpful, because that is probably, from both my experience and talking to leaders, they're so afraid because they're going in there thinking it's going to be a confrontation.
Yeah.
And
we prepare for it.
Yeah.
I mean, a little irreverent, but it's like, gird your loins, here we go. Yeah. Like, no, we're going in to connect human being to human being. And this is why I also believe, and this is a tough, but you're getting to know me, I'm pretty direct. Yeah. When somebody needs to be fired, if you've had all the tough conversations along the way, if you've connected with them, if you've given them opportunities to step up and make a choice, and they choose not to do it, they have fired themselves. Then it's no longer a tough conversation. It's like, well, you've chosen this because we've already had the tough conversations.
Right. Yeah, it's like someone said, instead of firing them, just tell them you're offering their services to the marketplace.
There's so many opportunities out there.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so this makes a lot of sense, and I really like the idea of connecting, because that's your mindset going in versus confrontation. So I think as those that are listening, if they have that framework and mindset going, that'd be great. How about we do this? How about we just walk through? I got 5 scenarios, 4 or 5 questions, just about if this was to happen, how would you go about it, given what you just described? Because I've got situations like this within my Vistage group and also other leaders.
Perfect. Let's do it.
I'm the CEO, and I'm aware that I've got to have this tough conversation with my key leaders. But I know deep down, if I was honest with myself, that I have some blind spots. How do I go about getting prepared for this conversation when I know myself I'm probably part of the problem and I always got some blind spots? Any advice for that kind of person in that situation?
Yeah, I think that's an opportunity to be strategically vulnerable. And I'm going to use that phrase purposefully. Okay. So there are times when we share inappropriately. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, a therapy session on the couch, because you're the leader.
Right.
But you can be strategically vulnerable by kind of going where I start with this Socratic question of, what am I missing? So Socrates posed that fundamental question, what am I missing? And so as a leader, you can say, I'm working on these things. I'm leading this. I'm really good at X, but sometimes I'm not aware, it's kind of like I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
And so when you can go to your direct reports and say, I would like constructive feedback from you. What am I missing? What am I not considering? What am I not even, that's not even like in my perspective, because I'm a little too myopic about it. And you can invite that type of feedback. The other thing that I think that's really important as leaders is you can also say, I am aware that I'm missing this and I'm working on it. And that way people can have more patience and grace with you. So for instance, when I first started in corporate, I'd come from the elementary school classroom to working on a sales team that had responsibilities in Europe, Asia, and Australia. I was the first to say, hey, looking at spreadsheets and figuring out this whole budget thing, this is new to me, but I'm working on it. My area of expertise is behavioral science to make our sales go up, but I'm working on this. So notice what I do. I give myself a little stake in the ground of credibility. And then I'm vulnerable enough to say, have some grace with me. I might be asking you some questions about this. And that's a fantastic way to go back and forth to say, I'm on a learning curve too, and so are you.
Right. Trust has to come into play here, though, right? There has to be, it's
Trust
one
is
thing
huge.
for a leader just to say, I'm working this, but if he hasn't built trust, and I mean real, like intimate trust, people are going to be like, yeah, whatever, right? I mean, that's got to play some role in this.
It actually plays an enormous role, but I'm going to be really controversial on this one too. I'm the opposite of the definition in the dictionary when it comes to building trust in your culture. So
Okay.
if you go to the dictionary right now, trust is built out of consistency of behavior. No, because if you're consistently a jerk, I'm only going to trust you to be a jerk, right?
Right.
If you're
Right.
consistently supportive, I'm going to trust you to be supportive. So when it comes to trust in your most intimate leadership levels in your organization, I want you to ask yourself, how safe is it to ask for help? And how safe is it to express a dissenting opinion and have the relationship continue to have a healthy dynamic? And if you can't ask for help because it's not a vulnerable and safe space to admit that you don't have it all figured out, and you can't express disagreement and know that everybody's secure in the fact that we're not building, factions and cliques, but we're on the same side disagreeing about how to solve the problem versus doing this, then you're never going to have trust. So it's just a different perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. The second part of this, so the second part, I think a lot of the leaders talk about, I don't love the term, but I don't know of a better one, which is this imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
this
Okay.
fear that I'm not good enough. In fact, when we started the Vistage journey, you go through the training, there's 50 people in the room, and at the end of the training, they go around, and I forget the exact question, but it was, what did you walk away with? And every single person who had, all these people were CEOs, ran a company, started a company, they all said the same thing. I didn't know if I belonged.
Yeah.
You thinking you have all this great success. And so this fear of, imposter syndrome is pretty consistent across. What do you have for thoughts around people? Okay, I know I got to have these conversations. I'm the CEO, but I have these days where I come running into the office, rushing to a meeting, and I walk in and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not sure I'm really capable of doing this. Any perspective on that, given your expertise around leadership and critical thinking, communication?
The irony of the imposter syndrome, Mike, is that it's only go-getter high achievers who experience it. So I taught elementary school. Let's go back in time for a second. I'll tell you a fun story. So I taught elementary school in Washington, D.C. And I was teaching in late 80s, early 90s. And even then, 10-year-old children, high achieving go-getters, politically incorrect today, but labeled gifted and talented, had the imposter syndrome. And one of the things that we used to talk about as teachers is that it comes from the fact that these kids were labeled, again, politically incorrect today, but they were labeled at that time gifted and talented and learning disabled. And so these children who had these labels given to them were like, well, then I don't belong in the gifted and talented if I'm also learning disabled. Right. And what fascinated me, it's why I went actually back to grad school to study the brain, is I love that dichotomy of how could you have these two disparate skill sets inside one brain.
Yeah.
But this is what happens as adults. We arrive in a room, especially a Vistage room, when you've got these incredible brains all sitting around this table, inevitably, every single person in there, unless they're, have a huge ego, you're going to have that moment of, do I belong at this table? Yeah. Am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I creative enough? Do I have what it takes to be in the room? And those are the two fundamental fears. Am I good enough? Fill in the blank. Do I have enough? Fill in the blank. And so here's what I tell really strong go-getter leaders. First of all, recognize that it's normal. It's absolutely normal to experience the imposter syndrome. And then here's what most people are trained to do: repress it and ignore it. And I'm the opposite. Invite those feelings to dinner. Invite those feelings to dinner. Talk to those feelings. And truly say, what is it causing me to feel that I don't belong? What's causing me to feel like I'm not good enough or smart enough? But talk it through, because here's the crazy thing about our subconscious. When the subconscious feels seen, heard, and witnessed, it doesn't feel like it has to come through the back door, whether that's a migraine, a headache, 3 a.m. conversations with me, myself, and I that are all anxiety and stress. But the minute that you invite that to dinner, you talk it through, that voice gets a lot quieter.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. The other one is a lot of leaders struggle with these. I've got to have this conversation with a leader. I hear this a lot, Vistage, otherwise, who is a high performer, incredibly successful sales. In a lot of cases, you see a lot of this in operating office or whatever. but they're really hurting the culture of the company. And the leader has this challenge of, boy, if I was to do something and this person leaves, my business will implode. So they stick with the person. And they got this incredible, difficult situation where someone's performing well on the business side, the P&L, let's call it, and then the other P&L I refer to as people and listening, they're really crashing and burning. What are thoughts about how to deal with those kind of people and the kind of conversations that would effectively help you navigate that?
I've never heard of this scenario before, Mike. I mean, this has never happened in my 30 years, right? I mean, I cannot tell you the number of times I have sat down with somebody saying, I have a rock star person, and yet they're miserable to work with, or they treat everybody horribly, or they're toxic to our culture. And I always, my first thought is, then why are we calling them a great leader? Like, they might be good at X, but that's not leadership at all. So let's just call a spade a spade. Terrible leadership if they're toxic to your culture or people don't want to follow them, like full stop right there. Then I want to challenge the way that we look at it. So I cannot tell you again how many times I've sat down with a CEO and have said, you keep telling me they're a rock star producer, but they make everybody miserable. They're this lone cowboy or cowgirl. They won't do anything that you want. And like everybody dislikes them because they're a jerk. And I say, so what's the cost of not having somebody or two people that could produce that dollar amount that actually built a culture that allowed everybody else to thrive and become efficient and have consequences that were more positive to the bottom line and to the culture itself?
Right.
And so we talk that through. I have let go of really strong producers because they were difficult, because the cost of having them to me is greater than the dollar that they bring in. And we can debate this. I know somebody's listening right now and they're going, no, I totally disagree with you. Fine, you can disagree with me. I have found from my own experience, my own anecdotal evidence, that I can replace that person with either one or two, sometimes people, but the cost of keeping them is too great on the culture. And then here's what it also tells everybody else. That's your value set.
Right.
That's what you actually prize more than anything. You'd rather have the almighty dollar than to have a respectful environment that values all of the significant contributors. And then it also tells me, and this is just me on a tangent, you're too lazy to figure out a better way to play.
Ooh, I like that.
And it's not like we all don't want to have a sustainable, profitable, like I have to protect all of the jobs, right? So it doesn't mean that I'm telling you to go out and fire that person tomorrow. No, I'm not. I want you to be thoughtful. I want you to be strategic. I want you to do the critical thinking of, how can I start to put in motion what it takes to either get that person on board and engaged, or move that person on to other opportunities, and then get the people that I deserve. And so I'll close as a long answer, but Mike, I really believe, and I've been saying this for almost 30 years, you have the team you deserve.
I like that.
And if you've got a great team and you're listening to this, booyah for you. And if you're like, oh, I have one of those toxic people, then start to sit back, take a deep breath and say, well, then how do I start to solve this? And again, I'm not so simplistic and naive. It's like, oh, go out and fire them today. No. What are you going to do though to start putting the wheels in motion to get a better team that you deserve?
Yeah, that's a great, I wrote that down. That's a good one, a team you deserve, because that's so true. Some people don't realize they deserve it. What's also interesting, that culture piece, everybody has what's defined as the culture, whether it's in writing or on the walls or whatever. But what employees pay attention to is what actually happens day to day, and they watch and they observe. And when you let this person continue to go down this road, everyone goes, okay, that's the real culture. That's really what's going to be accepted here. So I like that, what you deserve. That's good. You got time for one more question?
Are you sure? I'm good. Yeah, it's great.
Okay. The next one that's really is on my mind and a lot of people, and I heard business owners say the other day, I'm tired of having this Y, Z generation tell me what they're going to do and not do and blah, 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 right? If you look at statistics, and you're the expert in this, I'm just going to give you what I'm hearing. It's something like 70% of employees by 2030 or somewhere in that range, believe me, before that, are going to be this YZ generation, number one.
Yes.
Number two, in the next 5 to 7 years, you're going to have like 7 different generations working in companies. And so my last question is for a leader, how do you manage all the different expectations of these different types of individuals? That seems to be another challenge people are dealing with. And that goes for hybrid or in office or virtual. So I'm curious if you have any perspective for people that listen to this in terms of that dynamic, having all these different types of leaders from all these different generations.
It's complex.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to blow smoke. It's really complex. I think though that it starts with that fundamental decision of really believing that every generation, and I mean every generation, brings challenges and every generation brings solutions. And so if we can, at a fundamental level, respect that every generation has something to contribute that's significant, then we start the whole conversation at a level of respect. Because a lot of conversations start with, can you believe those millennials? Can you believe Z? Can you believe the boomers? Can you believe the traditionalists? Can you believe those Xers? And so we start with really kind of shallow judgment. So if we start with and I even joke, so if you go back, traditionalists, they didn't want feedback, Mike. They were a whole generation of, keep your head down, nobody's talking to you, you must be doing a good job. Right. Baby boomers were the first to say, hey, a little feedback would be nice. And then my generation came along and said, we'd love quarterly feedback, not, once a year, but we'd actually maybe even like a coach. And then now you've got a generation in the workplace that wants feedback in real time. They don't even want you to leave a voicemail. They won't listen to it. They just want you to text it to them. Or now they don't even want text. It's like, oh, what's at me, And so I joke out of all that because every generation wants it differently. It doesn't make it bad. So we have to remove the judgment. The other thing that I think that's really important, and this is huge, like we could talk about this for hours. So let's just keep it really simple and practical for today. Stop having conversations about a generic generation. And in an intimate team setting, especially for leaders, if you've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 generations, when you're behind closed doors, start saying, okay, let's talk about this as, what does Mike have to offer? What are Mike's strengths? How is he a significant contributor? What is Mike's legacy? Now we've got Erica. Erica is a first year. She just graduated from college. But let's talk about Erica's expertise. What is she going to contribute? What can she bring? Now, where might they have resistance working together? How can we reduce that resistance? What can they each teach each other? When you start to make it an intimate connection between people, it changes the tone and tenor of the conversation, because I can no longer just wave my hand and go, well, that whole they over there is the problem.
Yeah. There's no doubt. I use this term complete communication. And what you just were describing was like really trying to get to the understanding of people at a human level versus saying, well, you're age 58, you're age 32, so you must be thinking this way or that way. It's not always the case.
It's not. And I think that one of the things too is having them work together collaboratively, but without having to get on a project immediately. So one of the things that I encourage, in fact, I just had a coaching client last week and she was asking the same thing. She's like, I got a team that's 65 to 25. Yeah. And I said, so when have the 65 and the 25-year-old gone for a walk or for a cup of coffee? And I said, that 25-year-old, if they connect with that 65-year-old, I said, now this is going to sound judgy for a second, so we're all human, but take it with a grain of salt. If that 25-year-old sees that 65-year-old as caring, supportive, grandfatherly, grandmotherly, whatever it is that they connect with, the communication will be far more respectful than, I don't know that person, therefore it's just an old person who doesn't get it. The minute that they connect as humans and respect each other, I shouldn't say all, much of the judgment and the initial resistance starts to drop away.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, listen, I've picked up a lot in here, and hopefully the listeners have also. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have, or any other things that you're rising up in your world of leadership and critical thinking and communication that you wanted to share before we move on here?
Oh, there's so much. And I think that I am going to say this because I think this is timely, but we could talk for hours. I love these questions.
I could too, yeah.
I understand from a very logical, my background is science. I understand from a very logical scientific perspective that we are going to have an economic forecast for the next 12 to 18 months where everybody's going to be a little contracted and a little stressed out about it.
Yeah.
I want you to remember that much of your decision making, much of your mindset, the things that you can control, your energy, your focus, and your attitude do not have to be impacted by that economic forecast. It's a choice. And so again, those internal conversations that you're having with me, myself, and I about how you want to play and who you're up to being as a leader through whatever kind of economic shifts we have in the next 18 months, it's a choice. So I'd love for you to take control of that internal conversation, that internal dialogue of who are you up to being as the leader for your team?
Yeah, no, that's very, very well said. All right, AmyK, love the conversation. Appreciate your time. I know you got a million things going on. Is there a place where if people are listening, they could go learn more about you, find your books, whatever? Where would you recommend they go?
Oh, you're so kind. Super easy. You can go to amyk.com, AMYK.com. We have tons of free resources. One of our core principles is generosity. So you get a ton of free resources there. And then to all the women leaders, we have a very separate platform called SheGetsIt.com. And you can go to SheGetsIt.com. We have all kinds of free resources there. And we love to do what I do, which is keynoting, training, coaching, and we have online programs. So check it out. And if it's a fit, and I say that sincerely, if it's a fit, I invite you to take a look and join our community. But thanks for having me, Mike. Such a joy.
Yeah, same here. I'm hope we can have another one of these conversations because this is a really big topic. We could spend hours on this stuff. And like you, I'm all about this idea of how do you transform humans and how do you get them to think differently. And so I appreciate your time. And you got great energy, by the way. I love that part about you.
Well, it's truly this, you can tell I'm passionate about it. It lights me up. And I will absolutely accept your invitation to come back when it works for you and your members.
All right. Thank you, AmyK. Appreciate it.
Because this is my life. This is my dream. This is the